"You're trespassing on HOA property now," Constance Bellamy sneered as the rusted locomotive loomed behind her, deliberately blocking the only road to my land. "That train belonged to your grandfather, but now it belongs to us." She had no idea the very steel she used to trap me was hiding the claws that would dismantle her empire. "My grandfather's land is now part of our recreational expansion." She smiled, standing with one heel perched on the rusted steel rail that had once carried freight across the Texas plains. "And that train, consider it a symbol of your outdated claim." Constance Bellamy, president of the Maple Ridge HOA, had a voice like lacquered wood, smooth polished and completely rigid. Behind her loomed a forgotten diesel locomotive, parked overnight across the only entrance to the 5-acre property my grandfather had left me. "My name is Gabriel Langston. I'm a 43-year-old civil engineer and a widower, trying to rebuild something meaningful brick by brick on the land my family has owned since 1954. My wife passed 3 years ago in a highway accident. Since then, I've poured every ounce of myself into something solid, something rooted. This land was my way forward. The soil smelled like memory. The oaks held stories. And that train engine, Porsche 447, a Western Pacific EP7 diesel, wasn't just a rusted relic. It was part of my family. My grandfather, Walter Langston, ran that locomotive for 2 decades before buying the spur and the adjoining property in his retirement. I'd spent weekends clearing brush, filing permits, and drawing plans for the house I would build, part homage to the old station depots, part new beginning. But now my progress had hit a wall of steel. When I confronted Constance that morning, she waved a laminated map in my face, her French manicured nails tapping the edge of my land. "According to our 2003 administrative boundary update," she said, "smug, this parcel falls within Maple Ridge's jurisdiction. HOA bylaws apply. And since you've begun unauthorized site work, you're accruing daily fines. $250 per day effective last month." I tried to reason with her. I explained that I had the deed, the county survey permits approved by the zoning office, all clean. She dismissed it with a wave. "Old paperwork," she scoffed. "Administrative boundaries evolve. You'll want to consult Richard Bell about that." Richard, her legal advisor, stood beside her. A 67-year-old retiree with silver hair and sunken eyes, he looked like someone who'd spent too much time drafting threats and not enough breathing fresh air. He barely looked at me, just clutched his leather portfolio and muttered, "You're free to appeal, of course. But I should warn you, Maple Ridge rarely loses in court." That's when I knew something was off. Not just overreach, this was calculated. That train hadn't been moved in years. And yet here it was, perfectly placed to block access, just after I'd submitted final construction plans. My gut told me this wasn't about aesthetics or zoning. It was about ownership, or control. I called the county clerk that afternoon. Nothing had changed in the official records. No HOA boundaries extended over my property. No annexations. But Maple Ridge had submitted a request 2 weeks ago to clarify jurisdiction over a strip of land that conveniently included my driveway and a portion of the old tracks. I needed answers fast. That night I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Harlan Monroe, my grandfather's closest friend and fellow railwayman. He was 75, now retired in a quiet part of Harris County, but his mind was still sharp. "Engine 447, he repeated when I told him about the blockade. "That's Walt's old pride. He restored that locomotive himself. Called it his insurance policy." "Insurance for what?" I asked. Harlan's voice dropped. He always believed someone would try to steal that land one day. He kept things hidden. Documents, records, maybe more. Said if anyone came sniffing around, they'd better be ready for a surprise. The next morning I met Harlan at a diner off Highway 6. He slid a brass key across the table, its tag faded, but legible: WP Archives. Sec 7. "This'll get you into the railroad's old storage facility downtown," he said. "Walt stored backups there. Contracts, blueprints. He was meticulous. If someone's twisting maps to steal your land, chances are he saw it coming." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "And that train? It ain't just a blockade, it's a time capsule." On my way out, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Tessa Quinn, a reporter with the Hill County Watchdog, the local investigative paper. "Mr. Langston, I heard about your property situation from a neighbor," she said bluntly. "I've been tracking Maple Ridge HOA for a year. People are scared to speak up, but the patterns are obvious. They isolate, they fine, they pressure people to sell. You're not the first. I agreed to meet her. She arrived with a well-worn leather notebook, a shoulder bag full of documents, and eyes like a hawk. Do you know about the Bender property? She asked, sliding photos across the table. They lost their back acre to a boundary dispute after putting in a garden. Then there was the Sorensen family. They were fined $15,000 for installing solar panels without aesthetic compliance. When they tried to fight it, the HOA leaned on the bank, and their mortgage was mysteriously called in. Tessa's files were filled with redacted HOA meeting minutes, suspicious financial reports, and handwritten testimonials. One stood out, a typed letter from 2017 in which Constance had referred to land near the old tracks as prime potential for community development. It's all about the rail spur, Tessa explained. There's chatter that Maple Ridge is working with the developer, Heritage Partners, LLC, to turn the area into a luxury outdoor plaza. Boutique stores, a cafe, a scenic train ride experience. They need your land to anchor it, and your grandfather's locomotive. That's the crown jewel. My stomach twisted. I stared at the train that night through the fence line, its faded blue paint still bearing the old Western Pacific logo. My grandfather had stood here decades ago, warning me about how land, true land owned, not leased, wasn't just property. It was legacy. They can't build a future by stealing your past, he once said. I hadn't understood it then. I did now. I returned to the train just before sunrise the next day. The HOA had posted a security guard near the access point, a young man with a clipboard and earbuds. I circled wide through the tree line, avoiding detection, and reached the engineer's cabin. I ran my hand along the steel undercarriage, heart pounding. Near the driver's platform was a riveted panel. 3 screws had different aging. I pried it open, and behind it, concealed in the side wall, was a metal latch with a faded crest, Langston Rail MMT. I opened the latch, and inside, tucked in a weathered leather pouch, was a bundle of papers wrapped in plastic. Deeds, original track ownership documents, and a map hand-drawn with notes in my grandfather's handwriting. Clause 12, 4C, terminate if encroached. My breath caught. This wasn't just legal red tape. This was a built-in escape clause, an intentional safeguard against exactly what was happening now. I wasn't just holding a piece of history, I was holding the fuse that could unravel everything the Maple Ridge HOA had built. And I intended to light it. The sun hadn't fully risen when I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out like a battlefield map. Faded deeds, handwritten annotations from my grandfather, and a page marked Clause 12-4C circled in red ink. The quiet hum of the fridge was the only sound in the room, but my mind was roaring. That clause wasn't just legal jargon, it was a detonator, a clear condition buried in a 1953 track ownership agreement, stating that if any party obstructed, occupied, or claimed easement over the Langston Railway line, without consent, the lease and usage rights to the surrounding land could be voided. In short, if the HOA had knowingly placed that train across my property without authority, I could terminate their hold on every inch of land tied to that original lease. And based on the documents retrieved from that secret compartment, the HOA didn't just sit near my land. Their entire development, Maple Ridge, had sprouted up around a rail spur they technically didn't own. I didn't sleep that night, and I wasn't sure if I was more wired from adrenaline or dread. But I knew one thing: the next move wasn't mine. It was theirs. By noon that day it came. I pulled up to the property expecting a quiet afternoon of surveying. Instead, I found my electrical utility box padlocked shut. A red sign slapped on the side read, "Service suspended by order of Maple Ridge HOA." A burly man in a bright vest leaned against the locomotive, arms crossed. "New safety protocol," he said with a smirk. "Power's cut off until the board signs off on your project." I knew exactly what this was: economic warfare, HOA style. No power meant no inspections. No inspections meant no permits. No permits, no construction. I turned around and drove straight to the bank. I had to get ahead of the storm, but they were already one step ahead. Mr. Langston, my loan officer, began nervously glancing at his monitor. "We've received notice of an active property dispute on your file. Until it's resolved, the disbursement of your construction funds is temporarily suspended." I'm sorry. I barely remember the drive home. My dream was slipping away, buried beneath bureaucracy and petty power plays. That night, as I stared blankly at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was Tessa. "Meet me at the diner," she said, urgency in her voice. "I found something big." I got there in 15 minutes. She already had her laptop open, her fingers tapping furiously across the keys. "Heritage Partners LLC," she said without looking up. "Real estate development firm out of Austin. Guess who signed a non-binding letter of intent with them 6 months ago?" She flipped the screen toward me. There it was. A scanned letter with a Maple Ridge HOA header. President Constance Bellamy. Subject: Proposed Redevelopment Initiative, Rail Heritage Plaza. They'd promised to deliver the land, including the train, as the anchor feature for a luxury community plaza. Upscale boutiques. Gourmet coffee. A rail-themed community hub. Completion 2027. "They're already marketing it to investors," Tessa said. "You're not just a nuisance to them. You're the missing puzzle piece. And if they can't buy you out, they'll try to break you." I leaned back, the weight of it all pressing down. "If that clause in the contract really works," I said slowly, "I might be able to blow the whole thing up." Tessa nodded. "But it won't be easy. They'll double down." And double down they did. Within days, I received a cease and desist letter alleging I had trespassed on HOA property. Then came the security footage, heavily edited, showing me aggressively confronting the HOA guard near the train. The community forum lit up with comments painting me as unhinged, unstable. Someone even called my employer, hinting that my behavior was a liability risk. Then my contractor called. "Gabe, I don't know what's going on, but I've got to pull out. Someone emailed my wife a police report with your name on it. Said we'd be liable if we stayed on the job. I've got kids. I can't take the risk." He wasn't the last. Over the next 48 hours, 3 more subcontractors bailed. My entire build schedule collapsed. I was boxed in from every direction. The HOA had weaponized perception, leverage, fear, but they hadn't counted on what I now held: proof. Legal proof, historical proof, personal proof, and I wasn't alone anymore. Tessa introduced me to a real estate attorney named Rachel Kim. She'd taken on crooked developers and won. When I showed her the deed packet and clause 12.4c, she nearly choked on her coffee. "Do you realize what this means?" she said, flipping through the contract. "If this clause holds up in court, you don't just stop them, you erase them." We worked late into the night, cross-referencing land parcels, checking legal precedents, and drafting a formal notice of violation to the HOA. Rachel also filed a motion to freeze any further development actions by the HOA until ownership claims were resolved. But we knew that wouldn't stop them. Not really. The next blow came swiftly. A full-page spread in the Maple Ridge Monthly, the community's glossy HOA-funded newsletter. A rendering of the Rail Heritage Park in full color, complete with walking trails, a repainted train, and happy families enjoying scoopfuls of artisan gelato. And at the center of it all, my property. My train. My grandfather's legacy, whitewashed and commercialized. The caption read, "Coming soon, a new era for Maple Ridge." The rage I felt then wasn't just personal, it was generational. They weren't just trying to steal land. They were trying to rewrite history, erase the man who had built that track, who had fought to protect it with every ounce of foresight he had. I took one last look at the newsletter, then picked up the phone and called Rachel. "We file next week," I said. "All of it. Injunction, lawsuit, ownership claim. Let's light the fuse." She didn't hesitate. "I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday." But even as we prepared our legal assault, the attacks kept coming. My mailbox filled with anonymous letters. "Sell now before it gets ugly," one note warned. Another simply said, "Everyone has a price." My social media accounts were flooded with fake messages accusing me of tax fraud, unsafe building practices, even animal cruelty. It was laughable if it hadn't been so methodical. Constance and Richard weren't just playing dirty, they were playing to win. Still in the middle of the chaos, support began to emerge. A neighbor left a handwritten note on my windshield. "We believe you." An elderly veteran named Earl, who had lived in Maple Ridge since the first foundation was poured, told me he once got fined for flying the American flag outside of hours. He called the HOA a private cartel in khakis. More followed. Quiet voices, nervous stories. People who'd been silenced. People who now saw in me a shot at fighting back. It wasn't about my house anymore. It was about something bigger. Property. Legacy. The right to say, "This is mine, and you don't get to take it." As Rachel finalized our court filing, I returned to the train one more time, flashlight in hand. I stood beside the engine, running my palm along its cold, dented metal. "We're not done," I whispered to the darkness. Not by a long shot. I knew the next move would be bold, public, and irreversible. But with the past in one hand and the law in the other, I finally had the leverage they never saw coming. The morning of the community meeting arrived with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my collar, the weight of everything I had uncovered pressing into my chest like the locomotive that once blocked my driveway. But this time, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking in with evidence, allies, and the truth. Rachel Kim, my attorney, had spent the past 48 hours preparing every exhibit, every tabbed clause, every historical document unearthed from that hidden compartment inside Engine 4047. Harlan Monroe would be with us too, Walt Langston's oldest friend, a living witness to what that land once was and what it was always meant to remain. And Tessa Quinn, armed with a flash drive full of internal HOA emails, financial discrepancies, and a full report on the Heritage Partners backroom deal. They thought I would crumble under the pressure. They thought they could isolate me, shame me, bleed me dry. What they never counted on was that I'd do exactly what my grandfather trained me to do: follow the tracks to the truth, no matter where they lead. The Maple Ridge Community Center was packed. Word had spread fast and more residents showed up than anyone expected. Folding chairs lined the walls. Some people stood in the back. Phones were out recording. News vans were parked just outside. I waited near the back while Constance Bellamy began the meeting, dressed in her signature navy pantsuit, her smile, brittle eyes darting toward anyone who didn't look compliant. Richard Bell, calm and smug, flipped through his notes with feigned boredom. "Today's session," Constance began, "will cover our most exciting development yet, the Rail Heritage Plaza. A vibrant new addition to our community that will boost property values and bring families together in celebration of our town's unique history." Her voice dripped with polished charm, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the clicker. Images appeared on the projector. Glossy renderings of my grandfather's train cleaned up and turned into a photo op backdrop, surrounded by boutique storefronts, picnic tables, artisan coffee stands. It was everything she'd built her scheme around. Everything she'd stolen. That was our cue. I stood up and walked down the center aisle, flanked by Rachel, Harlan, and Tessa. All eyes followed us as murmurs spread through the crowd. Constance paused mid-sentence. "Mr. Langston," she said, tight-lipped, "this meeting is for residents and board matters only. This is about the land you tried to steal." I interrupted, calm but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And it's time the community knows the truth." I reached the front and plugged in a USB to the projector laptop before she could stop me. The screen blinked, then filled with scanned documents, side-by-side property maps, the real county boundaries overlaid with the altered HOA version. Next came emails Tessa had retrieved, Constance coordinating with Heritage Partners to secure railroad parcel for anchor feature, and Richard advising her to accelerate timeline before Langston uncovers historical complications. Then came video footage, unedited and time-stamped, of their security guard blocking my access, even pushing me back while a second camera filmed just my reactions. Rachel took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the room, "the land this project is based on does not belong to the HOA. It belongs by deed and contract to Mr. Gabriel Langston and has since 1953. The track's also his. And under Clause 12.4c of the original land agreement, any unauthorized obstruction or claim to that property results in immediate termination of any land lease tied to it, including the Maple Ridge HOA's standing authority." The room went quiet. Not silent quiet in that thick, pressurized way when people realize they've been lied to for years. Richard stood suddenly. "These documents are irrelevant," he declared. "They're ancient. Mr. Langston is trying to weaponize outdated paperwork to sabotage a community project that's been approved by a majority vote. That vote," Tessa interjected, "was based on falsified maps and undisclosed interests, like the development contract you failed to present at any board meeting." She held up a printed email chain between Richard, Constance, and the developer. "You didn't tell your own residents what you were doing. You didn't vote on the contract. You tried to sell what wasn't yours." Constance's face went red, the mask slipping. "So what if we knew?" She snapped. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here? That land is the only thing holding this deal together. Without it, we lose the investor. We lose everything. Our entire community's value plummets. The words hung in the air, raw, unfiltered, revealing. She'd admitted it. A woman near the front stood up. "So you lied to us," she said, voice shaking. "You told us this was for beautification, for the kids. You used our dues to pay for legal threats and secret meetings." Constance tried to recover, but the crowd was already shifting. More residents rose to their feet, questions flying, frustrations boiling over. A father shouted, "You fined me for a swing set, and meanwhile you're negotiating with developers behind our backs." An elderly man added, "My wife cried when we had to dig up her rose bushes because of aesthetic violations. And all along you were planning a shopping mall on someone else's land." Chaos broke out. Rachel leaned toward me. "Now's the time." I nodded and pulled out the final document, official, notarized and signed. "As of this morning," I said into the mic, "my legal team has filed to invoke Clause 12.4c, effectively terminating the Maple Ridge HOA's lease on all land tied to the original rail easement. A judge has already granted us a hearing, and we're filing for injunctive relief to freeze all HOA assets pending investigation." Richard paled. Constance sat down slowly, like the weight of it all had finally crushed her spine. "This isn't over," she muttered. "It never is," I replied. "But your version of it is." In the days that followed, the story exploded. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets. HOA dissolved after resident uncovers 70-year land clause ran in bold on front pages. Within a week, a county judge issued a ruling that confirmed the HOA had no valid claim to the disputed land. Their authority, built on a false map and hidden agendas, collapsed like rotted timber. Constance Bellamy resigned before the investigation concluded, disappearing from public view. Rumors swirled that she moved in with a cousin out in Nevada. Richard Bell retired quietly, disbarment hearings pending. In their place, the residents of Maple Ridge voted to form a new limited neighborhood council with transparency mandates and rotating leadership. They even offered me a seat. I declined. I had other plans. With the permits reinstated, the liens removed, and the title clean, I broke ground on my home a month later. Every brick was a middle finger to the people who tried to bury my family's legacy. And at the edge of the property, just beside the old oak tree, sat Engine 447, restored, polished, and repainted in its original Western Pacific blue and silver. We turned it into a museum car, open every Saturday. School kids come by, old railroad men drop off stories. One even brought a photo of my grandfather as a young man, grease on his overalls, proud smile on his face. A bronze plaque mounted on the train reads, "Where power tried to seize heritage and lost." At the dedication, Harlan stood next to me and said, "Walt would be damn proud of you." I believed him. And as I looked out over the land now, mine in every sense, I knew that some fights aren't just about property lines. They're about the right to say, "This is where my story lives." And no one gets to rewrite it but me. In a world where power often hides behind polished titles and legal jargon, the story of Gabriel Langston reminds us that truth, once uncovered, has the power to bring down even the most carefully constructed deception. Gabriel didn't start this fight looking for a battle. He simply wanted to build a home on land that belonged to his family. But when greed, manipulation, and control stepped in to erase his legacy, he chose to stand his ground, not just for himself, but for everyone else who had been silenced by fear. This story is more than a tale of one man versus a corrupt HOA. It's a lesson about the importance of knowing your rights, honoring your family's legacy, and refusing to be bullied by those who believe they are above accountability. Gabriel's victory didn't come from anger or aggression. It came from patience, research, community, and the courage to speak when others couldn't. To our viewers, this story is for anyone who has ever been told to sit down or stay quiet, for every neighbor fined unfairly, for every homeowner who felt alone in the face of bureaucracy. It's a reminder that standing up for what's right might be hard, but it's never without purpose. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to give up for the truth to come roaring down the tracks like that old train, unstoppable. And here's the practical wisdom we take away. Always verify what's yours. Titles, boundaries, contracts, understanding your rights is your strongest defense. Don't underestimate the power of documentation. Paper trails can become legal weapons when wielded wisely. Seek help when the system feels too big. Allies like Rachel, Tessa, and Harlan weren't just support, they were the reason justice was possible. Most importantly, never let fear of intimidation rob you of your voice. You are never truly alone when you stand in truth. To our amazing U.S. Daily Story community, thank you for listening. Your support helps us keep sharing these powerful, heart-rooted stories that reflect not just injustice, but perseverance, dignity, and the victories that rise from ordinary people refusing to back down. If this story moved you, we invite you to share it, discuss it, and be reminded that behind every boundary line, every fence, and every deed, there's a story. And sometimes, just sometimes, it ends with justice rolling in louder than anyone expected. Until next time, stay aware, stay courageous, and remember your story matters.